this course. So this, and then the response. So basically, deduction, response, and then of course is a Microsoft exam. So it's going to be performing those activities using Microsoft Sentinel, Defender for cloud, and Microsoft M365 Defender, Microsoft 365 Defender at the end. Another third-party product, because you can actually always ingest or basically stream a lot of the log capabilities into other products, and you can actually leverage those. Now, one thing I would highlight here real quick, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be exactly in this sort of like role. I mean, there's a lot of like overlap. Maybe you're a security engineer trying to get into this sort of like role or type of activities. You may be a developer with a heavy focus on the security side. Maybe you're just passionate to learn about it. It's fine. I think this is just sort of like a term that they use to make it a starting point. But you may not necessarily have to have this title. Like that's pretty obvious. But they actually provide the responsibilities, like detail it very clearly in this guide. We're going to look into it momentarily. But I do want to call out a few things here that will be helpful if you are preparing for this exam. Now, when you pass this exam, hopefully you will, then you can also take the Microsoft Cybersecurity Architect exam. So the way it works is, and I will actually use the other slide, which is slightly more intuitive. So you will see in the center here, this is a Microsoft Security Architect SC100 exam. This is an expert level exam. So there are different type of exams. There are associate exams, which require like intermediate level knowledge of the product. What it really means that you can holistically talk about the capabilities and you have a good grip on the configuration. It's not an expert. Like if someone talk to you, you can actually talk about the capabilities, for example, Microsoft M365 Defender, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you know like inside out, like deep. I mean, if you know at expert level, that's great, but you should have an intermediate level knowledge, right? And how it aligns with the MITRE attack framework, how actually the investigation work, things like that. And we'll cover a lot of these in this course. But that's not necessarily an expert exam in a sense because it covers few products. But what about the Microsoft Security Architect exam? Now, this exam, which comes after this, is good in a way because it's basically provide a more holistic view into the cybersecurity as an architect. So there's a lot more focus on zero trust. So what the zero trust is, if your organization is moving towards zero trust as a cybersecurity architect, you're most likely either going to be leading that effort or at least part of that effort, right? Then there would be some definitely product-related discussions and questions around that. So it's a little bit more expert in that way. I don't think complexity-wise, every certificate is a little bit different. And this is something very hard for me personally to comment on. But depending on your current skill set, you may find actually one of the certificates easier than other just because of that. I will quickly go through the other options you have. So the option that is highlighted is actually this exam that we're talking about, SC200. So if you pass the SC200 exam, then you can actually go and take the Microsoft Cybersecurity Architect exam. It's called SC100. Now, this exam was in beta for a few months, and it was just released, I think, in summer, if I'm not wrong, August of this year. That means that it ran for beta for a few months before that. So this is a relatively new edition. But if you are preparing for more on the cybersecurity side of Microsoft technologies, then this is a good sort of like a series of exams to take, right? So you can do SC200 and then you can move to SC100, or you can actually take SC300, which is more identity focused, and you can go into cybersecurity. You can also take the Azure and AZ500, which is more totally on the Azure side. There's a good exam too, and then you can go in. And you can also do the M365 Certified Administrator. So this is Microsoft M365 cert. So you see that what they basically want you to do is take at least one of these. Typically, you want to take more of these, like maybe 2 or 3 of these, because it will just enrich your knowledge and also improve your chances, because this is going to be, again, a breadth-based exam, and it also can go deeper into certain topics, which would be easier to understand if you have probably more than one. But SC200 is probably one of the most breadth-based in the way you will see like more on the Defender side and also cover the Sentinel on the Azure side. And then the AZ 500 is a good one to couple with that. But if you're focusing more on the identity, then you can probably start with SC 300 and then take either one of these. But anyways, I want to call it out because if you pass this exam, and hopefully you would, then you have a good opportunity here to probably continue and take the next one whenever you're ready. All right, one more poll, and I will keep it quick again, is when do you intend to take the exam? Because we're going to talk about next the preparation itself and the resources. So I just want to get a sense of when or if you are planning to take this exam. So the first one is like within next 1 month, pretty quick. Within the next 6 months, so a little bit intermediate future, and then within the next like 12, so pretty much a year. Or I'm not sure. So you may be just not sure because you just like wanted to know about the Microsoft Security products as a platform, right? So I will give everyone a minute here to go through. Again, this is anonymous, so we don't align, right? So you learn, and then you also do the labs. So labs are available actually publicly, the content, and then you can basically have the subscription to just do them on your own pace. So this is sort of like you don't really need any external help. So you get like a Kickstarter with this course. It will give you a good sort of like a starting point with some hands-on experience, and then the document will actually give you a little bit deep dive, and then labs will actually give you the configuration. Defender for Identity will help, like if you have the hybrid environment, so you still have like a local on-premises Active Directory, but you can also have like Azure Active Directory in the cloud, in the hybrid environment, or either or both. So depending like how the configuration is, you probably need both. So you have the Defender for Identity, which will help you understand if the account is compromised, and then you have the Azure Identity Protection, which will help you with the things like the risk. For example, if the credentials are stolen, maybe there's a sign-in with a password spray attack vector, things like that. So it should be able to detect that, right? But what happened after the compromise? Or let's say even, it passed that gate, then it will be basically some sort of like a exfiltration of data or accessing the data. That's where the Defender for Cloud Apps, which basically provide like, protection for the SaaS application, can also be other type of applications, but predominantly SaaS applications. And you will get sort of like alerting based on the setup that it is something malicious activity is happening on these applications. Now, while this first part is actually doing the high level sort of like a external threat coverage, the other part is the Sentinel. We're going to cover Sentinel tomorrow a lot, so I'm not going to spend too much time today, but just to give you an idea like why it is important, because first you get all the signals from these, like whenever, for example, Defender for Endpoint find a suspicious activity, it will report it back, right? So it will report it back and it will come up in the M365 Defender, but it basically going to be logged, and that log is accessed to the Microsoft Sentinel, where it can actually perform its own analysis, right? And that's how it basically detects the insider threats, right? So it basically look for the access pattern, any anomalous pattern that shouldn't be, like they're not typical, then it can surface them up, and then it can basically help you block them using these tools. So this is sort of like a high-level view of all the defenders working together. This is sort of like in a linear fashion. So the phishing email comes in, user basically open the email. It's the same diagram, a little more simplified. And then each sort of like a service here doing its part. So that is why you will see that in the exam also the question will come up. Or basically, generally speaking, when you talk to someone, right, they don't ask you, oh, should I use this product? They usually ask you, how can I safeguard my company or organization against a ransomware attack? So you need to think holistically. So probably all these services will be needed for that. Now, for the M365 Defender based sort of like features, this is where it sits in, right? It sits at the very top here. So Microsoft 365 Defender, this is sort of like the umbrella. That's why I said it's the umbrella. And then it basically have a shared signal pool, right? So all of these defenders that we're talking about, they feed into M365, right? So it's sort of like you can add another one here, let's say a Defender for IoT, and then it will feed the signal into Microsoft Defender, right? So again, I'm not going to go in detail here, but just showing you that if there is a user sign-in happening, then basically using the Azure Active Directory, but maybe it's a hybrid identity, so the integration over there is covering that because of the identity here, Defender for Identity. Exchange Online Protection, this is the email related, like a malicious attachment or URLs. A whole slew of attacks come from in the form of emails, all the way down to the identity protection, like a risk-based signals. And then you also have the cloud security here, right? So you will see that when we look into the Defender more closely in the next few minutes, it's basically going to give you the tools to respond to these signals. It's essentially, you can think about it as a portal where you go in and then you have the tools to respond to these shared signals, and it actually have built-in mechanisms to do that. That's why you're basically sort of like paying for that, and you will see questions in the exam talking about like holistically. They may not go in detail on one item. They're probably going to also talk about like, oh, you have a scenario where you need to protect your on-premise identity alongside with the data, and now you need to perform this sort of like take care of the scenario. How would you do that? And then you need to do, okay, so I will do the incident management in the Defender. All right, let me take a look at the questions. I've asked you to take a break at this point because I think we have to take hourly with this product. So basically, incident in Microsoft M365 Defender is a collection of related alerts and associated data points that make up a story for the attack, right? So think about it as in your organization, there's something happening and you are the security expert. They want you to figure out what's going on. What would your first step in doing that? Right? So if you have Microsoft M365 Defender, the way it actually enables you to do it, like look into what's going on and remediate that problem, is first look into all the signals. So signals are actually going to be like a data points coming in into the form of alerts. So what you see in this attack is basically this attacker coming in, and there are various entities that exist in the M365 Defender, but they actually exist across the services, right? So you have users, you have the devices, and you have the mailbox. So you can see that the users are most likely going to be in the Active Directory or Azure Active Directory or hybrid in both. Then you have the devices, and then you have the mailboxes. So devices are basically going to have some sort of like a Linux device, iOS, Windows, third party. It has to run some operating system on it. And then you have the mailbox, which is in this particular case, M365 is going to be the Exchange Online base, right? So whenever there is something going on there will be an alert, right, along with some data that feed into the threat intelligence. Now, threat intelligence is like a black box, and you will see that throughout this course and generally in the Microsoft platform on the security side. It's actually a blend of things together, right? It's basically machine learning, human intelligence, threat intelligence, third-party sources coming together, and then basically creating an incident which you as a security expert can work with and tell your management that you're looking into it. Sometimes there are more than one incident. So again, that's not like a rule that you also have always had like one incident per attack. But at least there's an attack that you can tie back to some malicious activity. So if you drill further, like how you actually see them or view them in the Defender, basically there are all these items here, the entities on the left are actually provided to you in the Defender. So you actually can do a full-fledged like analysis. Now we're going to do it in momentarily, so I'm not going to like walk through like in the slide, but I put it in here because if you just wanted to have a snapshot what it is, you will see that like the user devices, mailboxes, evidence and response tab, which is basically going to be what evidence exists that this is basically a malicious attack, and anything that is aggregated going to be here, and then how you basically respond to it. So basically you have to react to it, right? So what I'm going to do is that to explain this whole incident story. All right, I hope everyone can see it. I will zoom in a little bit here. All right. All right, the first thing you will see is I'm at security.microsoft.com. This is basically the landing page for Microsoft 365 Defender. And if you have licenses and set up and configure other Defenders, they're also going to feed data for most part into this. I will call it a portal. You can call it a dashboard, whatever you want to call it. But it's basically security.microsoft.com. That's the landing page. And you may want to bookmark it because you're going to spend a lot of time with it. And just to show you what's going on before getting into the incident, right? I will give you a very, very quick, like a 2-minute walkthrough at a high level, and then we're going to deep into like incidents. So I will just collapse everything here, right? So right now, what I have going, which is probably the most relevant for the exam and maybe a good starting point, is securing, I would call like a securing the bases, right? So you have the assets, so you have the devices, and we have the identities. So remember, like if we wanted to secure them, there would be some inventory, right? So inventory basically, and what's going on with that inventory and assets are going to be right over here. So again, devices are basically going to be, for example, there's an inventory here. We're going to cover devices in a minute here, so I'm going to spend too much time here. But you can see that I have a tenant and the identities, myself here, and a couple of other users are right over here. It will tell you what apps they are using and things like that. So the quick snapping view, right, what's happening in your environment. Now, I also have license for Defender for Endpoint. So there's a whole SKU of services here and features. So there's a dashboard, like what's happening in your environment. We're going to cover the endpoint in detail in this course, so I will come back to it. And then you have the email and collaboration. So email and collaboration, this one is driven by Defender for Office 365. Doesn't call it here. I know. And then you have the miscellaneous settings and reporting. If I just click on settings, you will see that settings have whole SKU of like features over here that you can go and you can configure. We'll do that throughout this course, so you will most likely get familiar with this one too. But what I wanted to focus on is basically incident and alerts. So if I click on the incident here, right, I have a bunch of incidents going on here. And I will explain how this is because I basically did some activity in my environment. And that's why I'm getting this basically incident here. So I will just click one. So I will just click this one. So user activity involving one user. Basically, it's an incident that I'm creating that if there is a activity that I'm interested in and maybe malicious activity, I don't know, but I want to look into it because if there's no incident, then the team's not going to come together, right? So basically, the idea is that you have an incident created. An incident always have some sort of like an alert associated with it. So the alert is actually something we're going to discuss next, but alert is there's some activity happening, and as a result, there will be an alert. An alert can be created like manually, it can be created by through the API, it can be created normally through the means of other defenders or security services or products, right? So in this case, if I click on it, there's a user activity. And what is important here, actually, if you go back, you will see that, actually, even if we go back to the higher view, you will see that there's a suspicious activity against this particular incident, and there is a source. So this is important. There's a source tab over here. So if you click on it, it's actually going to give you a breakdown. So it says that there is actually 2 alerts coming in from Defender for cloud apps. So this is important. The first thing you wanted to know is like where the source is, because that will help you solidify where you wanted to focus on. So this particular case is Defender for cloud apps. Now we will cover Defender for cloud apps too in this course, so you'll see that like how it's actually generating it, and then you can basically look at like how the alert was generated, what the policy is. So you can actually click on it if you want to, and in this particular case, it's basically going to take you into the portal for the cloud app. So you basically looking at the incident, looking at the alert, and you're now going to the source, like where the alert comes from, right? And here you can actually, typically what's happening now is you will find quite a bit of detailed information over here, but there would be a lot of overlap, or I would say a summary view here, and you can also drill down quite a bit. But depending on what type of source we are talking about, the details are sometimes very rich here in this portal, like in M365 Defender portal, but I think they're more richer in the actual source. So it's a little bit of that, and I think at some point you will get a good balance, and probably you get more details over here depending on what signals coming from the source. So the thing here is that okay, so you get this, So this is just one type of incident, right? There are others. So if I scroll down here, so there's another one. This is a more classic one, right? PS shell process execution on one endpoint, right? So if I click on this one, this alert associated with that, there's some activity, right? If I click on this one, now basically notice that this is something happening on a device. So it's telling me that on my Windows device, there is a particular process being executed, right? It's giving me a full trail here. And you can tell that this one in particular, because of the way that it works, right, it's happening on a particular device. Definitely there was some user logged in at a time. In this particular case, it can be a workload identity, it can be workload identity, and then looking for the evidence and the response, right? So there was a process that was identified. And what actually threat intelligence does, it actually look into each one of these sort of like sub-activities of the process, and it's giving me this evidence, right, to present, to work on. Now, just so you know that this is something that I just ran and make it suspicious on my own based on the lab, so I'm going to go through that momentarily, but this is how it's going to end up, right? And in this case, just so you know, if I scroll here, look at the sources here. So for the first one, it was the cloud app. For this one is actually the endpoint right over here. So depending, right, there's another one here called the batch file executed directly on one endpoint, and this time is 365 Defender. Now, you don't need to know exactly how these sources compile this. I think that's it happens automatically for most part. But once you work with the Defender products, right, you will see where they're coming from for most part. The important point here is that when you go to this event, right, so what you can do with it, right? So there's an incident that takes place. The question is what you want to do. So let's say you find it alarming that this particular incident take place. So you will basically going to go and say, who should I assign? Like that's the number one thing you do, right? You figure it out, like maybe there's more investigation need to be done, right? So in this case, I will assign it to myself. I would say, well, it's in progress. The meaning that you are now investing your time into it and your team is looking into it. And then there's a whole like a sort of like a skew of how you wanted to categorize it, right? So there's a whole like a true positive. So there are different ways to categorize it. If you don't find a particular category here, you can put other. Again, pen testing, if that's happening and that's the incident is because of that, then you can do the security testing. And then there's like a false positive, like maybe not malicious. Now you will see that the bigger the like a sensory input is, like depending on your organization you're working with, you will see false positive eventually, right? So sometime it actually going to tag it, you know, to tag it up front, and sometime you wanted to say like not enough data to validate. So there are different things there. Again, I'm not going to go in detail each one of them, but I just want to give you a sense, right? So you save it, and then this is basically going to show up here, and it will be in progress. So you can sort them based on active, in progress, and resolve. And eventually, when you are done with it, then you're going to basically resolve the incident. All right, let me take a pause here. I think I was talking for a while. Let's see if there are any questions. So what happened is that when you work with a product like Defender, it basically depends on the signals coming from different sources. And the way it wanted to highlight these signals that are basically important is in the form of alert. So you will see that there's quite a bit of alerting going on here. And again, because they can come from various sources like Microsoft and non-Microsoft, you want to be, it's really flexible in that sense, right? So we saw like one in a minute back, but I will just give you an idea here, right? So in this one, the alert is coming from the Defender, and it's giving me this sort of like a detail, right? There was a log on activity happening by this user. This is my SC200, like a test user, and accessing a particular app, and then the location and some data points there. And again, if you want to go and know the details, like what's going on, then you basically go and click like match properties, and then it will take you specifically where this activity arises, right? So the two ways to do it, I mean, this is sort of like a summary view. So this is like every time the alert is generated, there's an activity like log, like generating that. And then there is a detail view, which is basically within the product from which the alert actually came from, right? So in this particular case, it comes from Defender for Cloud Apps, right? In this particular case. But it's not always the case, right? Like, for example, if I go back here and click on, let's say, this one. So this is an alert. This is a little bit more benign in a way, right? Like there is a investigate priority score increase. So there's something, like a prioritization among the scoring. We'll talk that later on, but that is another sort of like alert. Again, you will see that all of these sort of like a sensory input coming in. This is another one. This is what I got when I basically ran on a machine a batch file, and then I want it to be coming in as an alert into my portal. And one way that you can actually do it in a more streamlined fashion is by going and perform a hunting on a thread, right? So you basically can do out of the box, which is called like more advanced hunting, and then you can also do what they call is the builder based hunting, which is like a UX based, right? Now we'll cover this later, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, but my point is you can actually go and create a custom KQL, custom queries, and you can run them on the all the data like that is coming into the M365 Defender, and then you can create the alerts. So there's so many ways the alerts are created. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, but the underlying goal for alert is something that you can actually get into your system so you can investigate it through the incident. Because the problem is that if you don't have alerts coming up, then how would you go ahead and deal with the incidents? Because incidents is usually something that high-level management will be more interested in, like how do you present, and we'll see that the reporting capabilities. But alert is something that is a little bit low level, so you can have way too many alerts, and you can figure out like which one you wanted to work with and which one you just wanted to not work with. And again, there's no like a right answer. It's more like one of those like a Goldilocks sort of like a ratio that you wanted to come up with something that works for your organization. So we're going to talk about like the hunting in momentarily, but that's how either through the third-party sources, Microsoft sources, or you basically working on the data points and creating the alerts. Let me see if there's any questions here before I move further into your secure score. Now, what I'm going to do, let me actually go and cover this now because I think, and see, I have 47.1%, so I have some work to do to improve this. But again, one thing I would say is that security posture is very relative to the organization. Some organizations who are starting earlier in their journey to improve their security, they will eventually improve it. It's not going to happen overnight, but there are, like, first of all, you will see this sort of like action to review. And there's a lot going on here, so I will just quickly walk through. But this is important because this is a topic that you're most likely going to see in the exam. So what does regress mean here? Regress mean that I actually have 2-point drop in the score because I have regressed on some particular feature or area that was there before, and then I just didn't keep up with it, or I just remove it, and then there was a regression. And you can click on it, and it will give you the detail, right? So like I said, enforce password history, minimum password age. So it's a password related action that I have to do. And I think I have a user that was set and I didn't set those properties, so most likely because of that. But I can investigate later, like what's going on. But it'll give you this sort of like a view. And it will give you a high level view too. I will just click on the history here. And here you will actually get an overall increase or decrease, right? So I might have some sort of like a historically like a regression on one area, but I have a 5.25% increase overall, like from September 1st all the way now. So there's an overall increase. And the reason is that usually you see that, this is my test canon, because it starts with like nothing. So you will have a low score or no score, and then it fluctuates a little bit, and then it stabilizes. and then it improves or decreases depending what you're doing in your environment. And then here it will basically give you a breakdown. Now, you don't need to know all the exact point allocation. I don't think that's part of the exam. But you do need to know that there is something called secure score, generally how it's actually getting calculated. And again, there's a full like a formula and all that, but you don't need to know exact formula per se, but you need to know how it is getting calculated overall, right? So there's usually the starting point is the recommended actions, and there are points for that, right? And the usually like MFA, for example, the device related, the data related, so the breakdown for the points, right? So if you go and have like an opportunity increase here is 48 out of 56, meaning like there's a 14.29% increase I can do by performing certain recommended actions, right? So usually what you want to do as an organization, you wanted to come to the recommended actions and review them. And you can sort them, based on the score that's going to be elevated, or you can do it based on the point. It depends how you wanted to rank them, and then you can basically look at like whether they are completed or not. So, for example, require multi-factor authentication, right? So this is a very important ask, and it will tell you how you wanted to do it. That's another important thing, right? So it will first tell you what it is, what is the impact in terms of the score. So it's quite a high-level impact, it's more than 1%. So I would say it's reasonable. And then we'll talk about how you wanted to implement it. And again, the implementation here, to be frank, it's basically the starting point in your organization. Again, this is a full-fledged task, right? Some administrator will be doing. So it's a good starting point, but it's definitely going to tell you what is needed and then the history. So let's say you did it, and then you may not able to do it for one of the administrator, then your history will show that whether the point has been achieved or not. So I haven't set it up, right? So my points are pretty much like a straight line here, 0. Another thing you can do here, like if you wanted to go, and this is more on the productivity side, most likely you end up doing that anyways, is you can copy the link, send it to your manager or whoever. You can also put it on the Teams and as an email. So it's a sort of like a shorthand here, right? If you wanted to share with your team members what need to be done. All right, let me take a pause here. Any questions on the secure score? Some information. Now you can actually see the query here. This is the advanced mode query. Running it and getting the results. Okay, so what I'm going to do, let me go back to the demo and then, all right, we did. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm back here. So you click on hunting. And then basically the first thing you have is the advanced hunting, right? So this is sort of like the pane over here. Now I want you to focus on the left-hand side here, right? So you have the alerts. This is basically the alerts that have been generated by all these services, right? So these are already there for you to analyze. I will just go and just show you real quick here. This is the schema. So when you click on this, it will give you a breakdown, what's inside it. And then if you go and just have a new query here, and then you double click and run this, it will give you the alert information, right? So remember, like we saw this alert right over here in the alert tab before, and now we are basically getting access right in the query. Now, why this is important? The reason this is important is one, you can actually form more advanced queries. Maybe you wanted to compile another alert, custom alert based on a few other alert types, right? There's also like details that you can get, for example, the alert evidence, which basically going to give you, let me expand a little bit here, like who is impacted and what time it is. Like in this particular case, is an identity, user entity is in focus, right? And then you can also go and look at the specific entities that are part of that alert. Now, what I will do is that I will just show you a couple of things here and how they work, right? So for example, what you want to do, if I click here, there's also a predefined queries here. So for example, I wanted to see if there is an execution of a certain process, right? Then I can run that. And I think this may not bring results because I haven't really done anything here so far. Okay, so I give you maybe an example where we can get some more data points. probably going to take a little while. What I'm doing is that I'm actually searching for a startup.batch file if ever been ran in environment across the board. Like, I'm not just talking about a particular laptop or a user. I'm talking about like in the entire environment. I'm just hunting for a startup.batch if that is ever referred, right? So in this case, you will see that there are multiple places where it is. So there's a device registry event and where this is a reference, right? Now, how I'm getting this, so remember, right, Defender for endpoint is capturing the data. There's an agent involved also, right? So it basically capturing this data. Now, what is important here is that I have this information. And let's say, hypothetically, that the startup.batch is the one that I'm after, right? Maybe there's a zero-day related vulnerability, or maybe there's just something there that I wanted to figure out, like what's going on. So what you can do is you basically take this query and then you can create what they call like a rule. So actually, let me click here. I created already a few of these. Here we go. So basically, I can go ahead and create a detection rule, right? And it's basically going to tell you that what it minimum needs, like a reporting ID. This query doesn't have that, but I have this one. Let me go here. I think this one should have it. And what I'm doing is that I'm more refining it so I can get the report ID. I'm basically refining it on the device registry events. And the device registry event is basically when you have the device inventory, it basically have this multiple tables. It has a table which captures the process that are running and then networking related events and just a registry. So registry is a Windows registry. If you're familiar with the operating system, then basically that's where the lot of configuration resides, right? So this is an attack which basically hide within the registry entry, right? Because it basically launch it as part of the boot, right? So I basically wanted to capture that. So what you can do is that once you have this query, you run it, and that's sort of like get you started with the, let me just expand it here. So I will copy this and I will come here. I will just create a new query. And let's say that, I found this important to track. Then I will go and I will run this. I see the results and I wanted to track this now. So I will go ahead and create a rule out of this. Now, what happened is after you create a rule here is basically it will give you this whole form to fill. It basically asking you to create an alert because now this query will run the schedule that you set up. And it's basically going to be, let's say, every hour. And then it's a custom alert that you're creating based on the query. And again, if you have to align it with the analytics report, like which type of threat is optional, you don't have to, but you need to categorize it, like which particular type of category that this particular alert belongs to. Now, this one is coming from the MITRE framework, and we'll cover that in a few minutes. But basically, this is more like a standard way of categorizing the vulnerability. I already have one created, so I don't want to go through this, but I will just show you. So I have one that basically tracking the PowerShell execution. And you will see this actually in the incidents also. I have another one that is the batch execution in the registry, right? So I'm basically tracking that. But the idea is that you can come here and you can see that. So this one is actually I put a medium severity because I don't really know if this is an actual threat at this point or not. But I do have this categorization here, command and scripting. So it's backing with the threat here with the MITRE techniques, right? Which is really important. And then you have the impacted entities, user, and the device. In this particular case, because the batch file was executed as part of the user, like user click something, and it's on the device, that's why you're getting these two. If, let's say, there's an email sent because of that, then there will be an email here. So again, the data is pretty, I would say, dependent on the actual attack that you're tracking, and then also depending on the products that you're using. All right, let me take a pause here and see if you have any questions. And, All right. Continuing on our journey on Microsoft Defender services, right, and products. So we're going to have next in line Microsoft Defender for Office 365. So Office 365, well, the name pretty much gives it away. It's basically targeting the productivity aspect of Microsoft services, Office 365 in particular. It actually does a couple of things. It basically provides you with the view for the reporting, threat protection policies based on your organization need. For example, if you wanted to go and create a rule around or the policy around who can actually send from external like emails and what type of email attachment are allowed, what type of scanning you want to do, things like that. There's actually digged into the Office 365 policies protection capability. Then you also have the investigation and response capability. So remember, like all these signals coming from, like, this email coming in, if there's a malicious attack being performed, then all the alerts coming out of it, they will land actually in the in the database, basically, which is going to be available through the hunting of M365 hunting capability console. So you basically have sort of like a cohesive view. But when you look into it from a high-level security posture standpoint, this particular service focuses specifically on improving the security posture around those key capabilities, right? So you basically can detect, you investigate, and then you basically respond. So from an architecture standpoint, and you will see this sort of like a question in the exam, like where it fits in, sort of like I would say more concrete design question, right? Where it fits in, right? So the Defender for Office 365 basically like act as in the middle that actually perform anti-phishing, user impersonation. When these are all these sort of like a threats that it will scan for. This is a built-in capability that you're getting. Now, while it's doing that, it's actually going to share this with the M365 Defender, the one that we're working with now. Now, another thing is that how it actually works, it depends like which product it's working with. So this Microsoft Defender for Office 365 is full of capabilities, but it actually need a service to plug on with, right? So Exchange Online is basically going to be the key service. So everything related to the email, for example, email like anti-phishing, anti-spam, URL-based attack, all those things, right, are actually going to be coming into from Exchange Online protection, right? So when you look at from the licensing standpoint, right, the licensing for the Office 365 actually going to include features, and then you pay for them based on like how many products or services and which product and services you're protecting. From a user standpoint, the more that you're going to protect, the better it is. So you have the Exchange Online based protections, and then you have the Azure Active Directory. Now, Azure Active Directory is basically a little bit here on the right because Active Directory have their own like identity based protection. We'll talk about that next. But it actually fits into it because when you sign in, you're signing it based on the Azure Active Directory, or as you can see, there's a bottom tab over here, right, with the on-premises hybrid environment, basically. So you can have the Exchange on premises, maybe you're still running like an older version, or you just have the hybrid environment, right? And you have the Active Directory and the Connect, basically syncing the account. So how do you actually work with it is depending on the configuration you have and the deployment you have. I think the more important thing here is that you will see that investigations compared to the one that we were seeing before are more driven by the attack vectors that are predominant in the Office 365. So this is an example, right? Like the email is sent with a malicious URL, and that was detected, right? So there was an alert, and then that alert actually tells you that, well, there's an investigation taking place, and investigation will have this sort of like a summary view, which is basically going to tell you what happened. So again, when you see this sort of like a diagram, it comes because of this right over here. This is really important to understand because you may not see this diagram in your version, right? Like when you deploy and when you configure, right? You may not see all of these, right? And the reason is that depending, like if you don't have the Exchange, like for example, let's say you're running on premises, right? And then you have a device, and then you open a device, and device get infected by a malware. Then if you don't have the endpoint protection, then you won't necessarily get some of these sort of like a exposure data points, right? You won't have that. So you won't get the device related information the same way you're getting over here. Now, I put this slide in mainly because it's very easy to talk, but I mean, in your own time, you may have wanted to review how large companies are actually implementing these. And one of the ways you can do it is by looking into the case studies. Usually the coverage on the technical coverage is not very high, but they still talk about like how they implement it, at least at a high level. It won't hurt actually to go through some of these just to get an idea, because there will be questions in the exam. They will be talking about it a little bit more from a high level, like a security ops standpoint, like how you wanted to use it. Because the questions are not always going to be configuration related. They can be around like you wanted to make sure that you improve the security posture of your organization, and you're very heavy on anti-phishing right now. Like, it's a lot of like phishing happening. How would you do that? So in that case, you need to understand like how should I deploy this, right? So that's sort of like the key theme there, right? You will see that all of these Defender for X series have that. So the Defender for Identity, which is the next we're going to talk about now. Now, this one in particular is interesting. It's called Defender for Identity, but it's basically focusing mainly on the identity, defending them for the on-premises, because on the cloud, we already have extensive protection by protection and other services, but this is basically for if you're still running local on-premise